Welcome back to the Larson Show. Best email so far this hour, but you can send more to talk at larslarson.com. Jim Miguel says, Lars, Donald Trump needs to know that he should fire Rod Rosenstein, and he will have the backing of his entire base. To hell with the Democrats and their crying foul. Everything they've done so far is foul. If he can't get Sessions to do it, then fire Sessions and get somebody in there who'll fire Rosenstein. Quit being afraid of the sky is falling if he fires even Mueller. They'll scream for a couple of weeks and then they'll give up. Why this contrived notion? Screwing up the entire presidency. Let them pay the money to come up with something later. And don't let the rhinos like McCain and Flake and McConnell and the others dissuade you. They are dead wrong. I tend to agree with Jim. I kind of wish they'd get rid of Rosenstein. Although Mueller, just let Mueller continue to be Don Quixote out there tilting at windmills, and we'll see how that works out. Anyway, welcome back to the program. Glad to be with you. Wayne Cruz joins me now, who's VP of Policy and Director of Tech Studies at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Wayne, welcome back to the program, and tell me this. Do you think Mark Zuckerberg wants to be regulated by the government?
Thank you so much for having me. Well, they tried to pin him down on that today. I don't know if you watched this marathon session, but you had almost half the Senate sitting in front of this guy. But he talked about the European Union's regulation of privacy, and that's what this is all about. There's Cambridge Analytica data leak and so forth. He said that he is implementing so-called opt-in procedures for Facebook, that he already operates under that principle, and that Facebook will continue to do it. But what you had today was legislators saying, will you support the Honest Ads Act, and will you support the opportunistically introduced today Richard Blumenthal and Ed Markey bill called the Consent Act to opt in. They used this opportunity to promote their own legislation. They tried to pin him down on whether he would support the regulation, and he wouldn't do it. He said he would work with them, and he said it to CNN and to others. He said, yes, he does support regulation of the industry. He's not anti-regulation. But they couldn't pin him down on specific. And I think a couple of the senators got to that point. Senator Mike Lee was one. Also, Senator Dan Sullivan asked him, he said, well, you know, one of the problems is that regulation, the big guys get to set the terms of the regulation, and you guys are the biggest ones out there.
Yeah, well, you know, Wayne, I didn't get a chance to watch all of it because I was on the air part of the time. But at the very beginning of this hour, I told my audience, I said, look, when you have, big banking regulations, Bank of America and all the big dogs, like Citibank and Chase Manhattan, they have no problem with it. They can spread that cost out nice and thin over a giant customer base. It's the little guys that get squashed by that. So here's Zuckerberg already in this multi-billion-dollar company, and he said, yeah, fine, regulate the whole industry. He knows that's going to keep his potential competitors out and keep him in, and it benefits him. Do you think these guys and gals on Capitol Hill appreciate that?
I do not think they appreciate that, other than Senator Dan Sullivan. He's the only one I heard make a point like that. But he's inviting regulation too much, and especially with his saying that we can go after everybody. Look, everybody agrees on child pornography, on violent speech, on terrorist speech. It's easy to decide what that is and take that down generally. But we're talking about fine lines and adult debates over abortion issues and complicated things like that, and hate speech. And you have these legislators saying, how are you going to stop that stuff? And Zuckerberg saying he'll want to stop that stuff. So we're getting into some really, really sketchy issues there.
Well,
one thing that really interested me, somebody asked him, he said, is Facebook a monopoly? And he said, no, I don't feel like a monopoly. And I think there's something valid to that, because Facebook is the result of a competitive process in a sense. You had MySpace, you had Google trying to do +1 and so forth. But guess what, Lars? If they get regulation, Facebook will then be a monopoly, because it'll be the one who can meet the regulatory standards, and the next garage-based or dorm room-based social network or whatever type of new technologies on the horizon simply won't emerge, because you've got somebody who's already in place who can sort of set the terms.
Well, let me tell you what scares me, and you just mentioned it. First of all, it was Lindsey Graham that said, are you a monopoly? And no, I don't feel like one. And he says, name your biggest competitor. And all Zuckerberg could say was, well, we've got a lot of them. And he goes, well, name your biggest one. And he names off Apple and Google, the so-called FANG, Facebook, Apple, Google, and Netflix. And Netflix doesn't do what this would be like saying, who's Ford's biggest competitor? Well, that's DeWalt Tools, or it's, you name things that have the companies that have nothing to do with what you do. But this is the scary part.
And that goes for fake news, for foreign interference in elections, and hate speech.
Now, hold on a second. What is hate speech? Because this is where if the government, I'm not going to argue the First Amendment applies to a private company. It does not. First Amendment applies to government. But the minute the government comes in and says, we're going to put regulations down, then the government is getting involved in this. If they say, we want to regulate you and we want you to take hate speech off. Well, to Jeff Zuckerberg, my commentaries on illegal aliens probably qualify as hate speech. Exactly. My commentaries against abortion and in favor of life probably, to Jeff Zuckerberg, qualify as hate speech. So we're talking about shutting down an awful lot of Americans from being able to say what they want to say on the biggest single and really only platform out there.
Yes, alongside the privacy debate today, the biggest and thorniest issue that came up was this discussion over hate speech and other kinds of controversial discussion that, as a First Amendment matter, we have a right to talk about. And the government shouldn't try to ban the allowing of that kind of conversation going on Facebook. But he got pressed on questions of, as you just said, if you're having a testy debate on illegal immigration, same thing happens with the anti-abortion debate and the abortion debate. And those kinds of questions came up, and they don't really have answers. You get into the gray area, what counts as hate, who gets to decide. Very, very dangerous area for government to start regulating in. And I'll say, too, Lars, some of this element over the debates and over these kinds of discussions treads into banning anonymous speech. I get that you want to stop interference that happens illegitimately. I don't think that the kind of interference they're talking about with just web pages and news stories counts for what it is. I don't agree with that at all. But the idea of banning anonymous speech or requiring disclosure of who you are, one of the great things the Internet does was it protected a platform where we could speak our mind, but we didn't necessarily have to reveal our identity. Kind of like the Founding Fathers writing the Federalist Papers and signing the name Publius, or rowing out into Boston Harbor to be able to have a private conversation. The Internet ought to still allow that in some manner, but I think with some of these regulatory pushes that we're seeing, we'd see a clamp down on that kind of speech, which I think is chilling as well, in the same way you talk about with issues that are controversial.
We should be very, very careful about allowing the government to allow a private company to start deciding whose speech is worthy and whose is not. Wayne, it's always a pleasure to have you on. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Have a great evening.
And you as well. That's Wayne Cruz, VP of Policy and Director of Tech Studies at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Glad to be with you and glad to take your phone calls and emails at 866-439-5277. Email me, talk@LarsLarson.com. Check out our Lars Larson Show Challenge Coin and vote in the Twitter poll @Lars Larson Show. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.